Counselor McGinnis, you are all set and ready to go.
Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'd like to call this October 18th meeting of the Community Planning and Economic Development Committee together. The time is 8:05. And I guess we'll go to item 2. Rick, did you want to do the intro? Oh, I'm sorry. We've got committee member Councilor Winograd, council member Deb Poland, Mayor Sherry Cantor. We also have Todd DeMay, who's the town planner, and Dwayne, the community development director, as well as Don Poland and our town manager.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, everyone. We're very pleased to have the opportunity to discuss the draft of our town's affordable housing plan. As folks may know, state statute requires that once every 5 years, every municipality in the state has to prepare an affordable housing plan that specifies how we're going to increase the number of affordable housing units in town. And as important as this legislation is to the state, it is equally as important to our town council, as evidenced by the council's commitment of $6 million in American Rescue Plan Act funds for our affordable housing development program. Now, some time ago, we formed an affordable housing advisory committee, and that committee was led by our town planner, Mr. Dumais, to develop our affordable housing plan. This committee was comprised of both staff and residents who were tasked with working collaboratively to create our plan. Later in the development process, we engaged the services of Dr. Donald Poland, who's with us this morning from Goldman in New York, and we tapped into Don's expertise to help us draft our plan. And Don is with us this morning and will provide our CPEG committee with an overview of the draft of our plan. And we're prepared to respond to any initial questions that the committee had. This plan will also be shared with our Affordable Housing Advisory Committee for their input and feedback. And based on feedback we received from both our CPED and our advisory committee, we would then come back at a future date with a final draft. So this is really just the first step in a longer review process. So I envision we would add this to the agenda for next month so that the committee had some time with the actual draft, and then we can further dive into some of your questions that you may have before finalizing this plan. And through you, Madam Chair, I will turn things over to Todd DeMay just for a moment to see if he had any additional comments to mine, and then we will turn things over to Dr. Poland. Through you, Madam Chair, Mr. DeMay, our town planner.
Thank you, Mr. Ledwith. Todd DeMay, town planner. Briefly, I think the town manager touched on all the critical components to bring us up to speed on this initiative. I want to take my time just to introduce Dr. Poland. He's a senior vice president, managing director of planning and strategy at Goldman York. He's a geographer, planner, and community strategist whose work focuses on assisting communities compete for wealth and investment through strategic market, land use, and planning interventions that build community confidence, foster pride in place, create governance capacity, and grow market demand. He has over 20 years experience in the public, private, and nonprofit and academic sectors, and he offers a unique approach to addressing social, economic, spatial governance, and policy challenges, all related to creating and maintaining healthy, vibrant, and prosperous communities. Dr. Poland earned his PhD from University College of London, Department of Geography. He's also a visiting lecturer in public policy at the Graduate Studies program at Trinity College, and lectures geography and urban planning at both the University of Connecticut and Central Connecticut State University. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Poland.
Thank you, Todd. I appreciate the kind introduction. Let me share my screen here and get everything set up. Madam Chair, thank you for this opportunity to present to the committee this morning. As I swap my screens, I believe you guys should now have my full screen. So I will be working directly from the draft plan today. It's not a separate PowerPoint presentation. And what I want to do is kind of run you through what I think are the critical points in the plan for you to be aware of. This process started, I think, over a year ago now. And I also want to recognize Todd and his staff for their assistance with pulling together the final draft and formatting. So with that said, the plan consists of 4 chapters. I believe there's an appendix that's going to be added to it in final version, some of the material that helped build it out. We tried to keep it short and to the point, and ultimately starting off with an introductory section that kind of goes over affordable housing and the need for affordable housing. Just very quickly on this page, it introduces the fact that there is an affordable housing crisis in America. It's not just a West Hartford issue, nor is it just a Connecticut issue. It's a national issue. That being said, how it manifests itself is different based on local community conditions. With that understanding, actually, it's kind of interesting. At the beginning of this process, in working with the steering committee on it, I was very cautious and kind of tempered in my views about West Hartford's ability to, at the very least, achieve the 10% state threshold. Right now, you have 7.43% of your household housing that's qualified as affordable, as defined by Connecticut state law. And the fact is, achieving the 10% for most communities is a challenge, and I felt the same about West Hartford. But as we go through this presentation, I'm going to introduce some information and so forth, and kind of explain to you how my perspective has actually changed on that. And I think that's important. So essentially, explaining what is planning, what is the planning process that was used to create this, some summary information on sustainability and sustainable housing. Please bear with me as I will move through some slides quickly, and others I will linger on for a bit. So the first slide that I want to linger on is actually the section on why affordable housing now, or why are we planning for affordable housing? And this goes back to 2017 when the state passed legislation mandating that municipalities create an affordable housing plan once every 5 years, specifically stating how it was going to increase affordable housing. That being said, in planning, this is not new. Actually, if you go back to the early 1990s, statutory changes to the planning legislation and zoning legislation were made that actually made it mandatory for communities through their plan of conservation development, through their zoning regulations, to actually encourage and promote and provide for affordable housing. Unfortunately, I don't think communities took those statements to heart as much as the legislature had hoped, and you jump ahead almost 30 years, and I think that's where you get the 8-30J legislation from 2017 that mandates this planning process. At the end of the day, planning for anything, but especially planning for affordable housing, is important. So what does affordable housing mean? This is probably one of the biggest challenges in the context of, planning for and providing affordable housing. When most people hear affordable housing, they think back to past decades and eras of public housing. And that's not what we're talking about. The median household income in the greater Hartford region is just shy of $120,000 per year. That means 80% of AMI, the first threshold of affordability, puts a household income around $93,000 per year. And the fact is, $93,000 per year as a household income is by no means a low income. But it also gets to the fact that, we are a high cost, high income region, and West Hartford is a high cost, high income community. And therefore, housing affordability can be a challenge for households who are even earning very substantial incomes. One other point to make here is qualified versus market rate. The fact is, most communities, and especially West Hartford, you have a lot of housing or a housing stock that has housing units that rent at affordable prices within the marketplace. We refer to those as market rate affordable. In the context of the land use legislation 8-30G and some of the mandates on communities to provide affordable housing, what we are dealing with is a state definition of what is qualified affordable housing. And that has specific requirements attached to it. And therefore, your amount of qualified affordable housing, the 7.3%, is less than the existing, market rate affordable housing within the community. This slide kind of gets at that. In order for housing to be qualified as affordable, it must be government assisted, rental assisted, CHFA, first time home buyer mortgages, and I believe also some FHA mortgages, deed restricted units, and then ultimately that providing the calculation for then the 7.43%. In this, one of the biggest challenges once a community hits the 10% threshold, and just to be clear, 10% doesn't mean you've solved the affordability problem. It means you've hit the threshold in the context of the affordable housing legislation, but need is most likely greater than that 10%. That being said, each of these categories, government assisted, tenant rental assisted, the CHFA mortgages, those are all moving targets. That is, they tie to the household, not to the unit. And therefore, or most of them tie to the household, not the unit. And therefore, they fluctuate year to year. So you could even add more affordable housing but still have your percentage go down if a bunch of persons moved out of the community and so forth. So the deed restricted, which is tied to the unit and typically for a 40-year period of time, from my perspective, becomes the most important. The more deed restricted you can add, you can provide, the more stability you create within your affordability calculations. We then took a look at household incomes and a bunch of data sets around kind of housing value, demographics, and incomes and so forth. And what this slide basically shows us, whether we're talking about rental households, the fact is there are a lot of households in West Hartford and in the county and the state that are what HUD calls housing burdened. And that means if you're spending more than 30% of your income on housing costs, that you are ultimately burdened and there is an affordability problem. And as we see here, for example, in the rental realm, over 40% of renter households in West Hartford are cost burdened by their housing. So this next section is fairly lengthy. I'm going to go through it fairly quickly, but it focuses on the existing conditions, demographics, socioeconomics, and housing. I think there's some key points in here that are worth mentioning, especially in the context of your existing housing stock and housing occupancy. You have approximately 69% of your housing is single family residential. That runs a little bit higher than the state. I think the state runs around 64, 65%. But what I think is most interesting about West Hartford, and I think it's one of the strongest qualities of West Hartford in the context of housing affordability, is that other 30% of your housing stock is actually very diverse. You have two families, three families, and then a wide variety of multifamily housing, both in the rental category and also in the home ownership category. So unlike most suburban communities in Connecticut, you have a greater diversity in your housing stock, which provides a greater opportunity for affordability. More important, I think, also is just the strength of the housing market in West Hartford, that you have this very diverse housing stock and it doesn't harm your community. And I think that's important in the context of realizing that, a community can provide affordable housing can accommodate it and not have the negative impacts that are often perceived to come with affordable housing. These blue dots, just so you know, in the top right corner are my cues. They're not part of the plan, but they're just my cues to stop on specific slides. So in this, once again, looking at that, looking at some of the income aspects of affordable housing, you know, once again, re-showing those challenges in the context of cost burden households, but also looking at the median rents for West Hartford. I think this is important to consider. One is a median rent of $1,361 actually for, you know, many rental households falls into an affordable rent in the marketplace, regardless of the definition of affordable housing. That being said, you can see where your rents, you know, are actually substantially higher. I know it doesn't seem a large amount, $200 or so, but $200 rent over the county and the state actually does signify that even your rental housing is expensive, and therefore the importance of providing an affordability component to your housing stock. We also did a housing needs assessment to kind of look at, we compare basically household income to housing value and or housing rents to see where the greatest deficiencies are within the marketplace. On the home ownership side, yeah, we expect this. This is pretty much any community in Connecticut will show that there's deficiencies at or below, you know, approximately $75,000. Which is running probably around 64% of AMI, just to put it in an affordability context. The fact is, providing affordable housing on the home ownership side is very difficult, is very challenging, and therefore I always recommend the communities to really focus on that rental side. On the rental side, you can see that the greatest need for affordable housing is actually kind of in the lowest income brackets. I believe the federal poverty rate runs around $28,000 in household income, and your greatest need is from $35,000 and below for that. The fact that there's showing a gap or a need here at the higher end in the rental market, I think is important to note. It's not saying that this is where you need to build affordable housing, because most of this will not qualify as affordable. But what it says to me is you can kind of have your cake and eat it too. That is, you can focus on a high quality, high income rental component because there is a demand for it ultimately within the marketplace while providing an affordability component. And I think that's one of the greatest strengths West Hartford has in the implementation of providing more affordable housing. One other slide I just want to touch on here in the data set. We went back and looked at housing permits and kind of what's been built over the past 20 plus years. This gives us an idea of at least a historical average of how many housing units per year West Hartford has been absorbing into the marketplace. And we use that to kind of project forward. That being said, in the most recent years, and it's not fully shown here as approved housing takes time to be built and occupied and show up in these data sets. The fact is, I think in recent years, you've been exceeding your past averages. So when I get to the projections later in the plan, they are conservative, and I actually think you can outperform them moving forward based on the multifamily housing stock that is the primary product being built. So the most important part of the plan is the strategies. This is the crux of the plan and producing affordable housing within West Hartford. This is the slide that I truly feel now is the most important slide within this plan. We start off by taking a look at your most recent and kind of existing activities around affordable housing. And as I said, while I was cautious at the beginning of this process, saying the chance of West Hartford, actually hitting the 10% threshold in any meaningful amount of time is probably unrealistic, that you probably have to look at it as a 20-year plan to get there. But thanks to Todd and his project tracking, we were able to get a look at a lot of the recent projects that have been put forward that include affordable housing components and get an actual count on what's been approved in recent years. And the fact is, you guys have approved, I believe, 397 affordable housing units, or almost 400,000 affordable housing units in recent years. Some are built and occupied, some are under construction, and some are in the pipeline to be built and constructed. But the fact is that actually moves you once these units are, certified by the state and included in the 8-30G affordable housing list, that would push you up over 8% in your qualified affordable housing. And the fact is that is a tremendous increase, a huge accomplishment. And for me, what it really demonstrates is even before you had an affordable housing plan, your actions around affordable housing have been successful and are producing units. With the plan now, if you guys implement this plan, I truly believe you will continue to succeed at this. And I truly believe that within less than a 10-year period of time, and maybe much less than 10-year period, you guys could actually hit that 10% threshold. You're only about 1.5 percentage points, away from getting there. So I think this is a testament to the community. And most important, it demonstrates that you can produce and provide affordable housing. And that is a great position to be in compared to many communities that just aren't in the position to even provide market rate housing at a substantial rate to accommodate the affordable component. So congrats to you. With that said, then the plan recommends, and I'll go through each of these in summary. First and foremost, I think it's important to actually identify locations, and I think the 8-30J legislation kind of implies it, of where you can best accommodate affordable housing. So the first objective is targeting housing investment. And from a public policy standpoint, I always think targeting is a good choice. Gives you an opportunity to build from strengths, to focus resources, and kind of create an environment where you can get the biggest bang for your dollar in investment. So the New Park Ave corridor, the Farmington Avenue corridor, east of the center, West Hartford Center itself, Elmwood, in the New Britain Ave corridor, and Bishop's Corner. I think these are the locations that are best positioned to accommodate multifamily, mixed use, and affordable housing moving forward. In addition to that, it's not just about those locations and so forth. It's also the fact that we've seen a softening in the commercial side of the real estate markets, and that ultimately housing, whether it be market rate and or affordable or mixed use development, create a great opportunity to reposition existing locations and redevelop existing properties. Being a community that's built out, I think these are the areas that lend themselves the most to accommodating new development. From a regulatory perspective, the plan recommends we did a general review, but we recommend a more intensive review of specifically the zoning regulations to try and identify where there may be impediments or barriers to affordable housing. And we also recommend kind of focusing efforts moving forward using the existing transit-oriented development provision as maybe a provision that can be tweaked or a provision that can be duplicated to encourage affordable housing. At the end of the day, that That provision is actually a great zoning regulation. It provides a lot of flexibility on the developer side, while it also provides a lot of protections for the community. And it's through a regulatory vehicle like that that I think you're going to see the greatest opportunities for affordable housing and multifamily and mixed use to be developed. And it can easily be applied to the 5 target areas that are noted above. We also recommend consideration and further review to establish an inclusionary zoning provision. That is a provision that would require a percentage of housing units in all residential developments to be affordable, and recommending a range of somewhere between 8 and 15% is the requirement. 8% keeps you at the status quo. Make sure you don't drop any lower on your percentage. And 15% gets you moving forward, or any number above 10% will get you moving forward for increasing your affordability number. But the 15% on the market side, since ultimately the policy, places a burden on the market, the developer, to provide and subsidize the units, the 15% keeps it within a reasonable financial threshold on the development side to not overburden it. I think one of the biggest challenges with 8-30G and why it hasn't performed is it has a 30% threshold, and it ends up undermining the feasibility, the market feasibility, the financial feasibility of the development. We also recommend considering looking at your permitting fees and providing reductions and or waivers in permitting fees related to affordable housing. Permitting fees do create costs on development, and things like building permit fees can be a substantial amount in the context of a multifamily or a mixed-use development, and therefore truly do, by waiving or reducing these fees, they truly do create a reduction in the cost of building housing, which should ultimately translate into reduced cost of housing. Property tax abatements, while I know they can be controversial, I always say I'm not in the business of telling communities how to spend money or how to tax and so forth. I think as the community learned and I was involved in the project, the one park development truly showed how a tax abatement can be effectively used to get an outcome of a redevelopment project that the community wanted, and B, provide an affordability component. So I think the adoption of an of a tax abatement policy around affordable housing would be beneficial to the community. It's a direct kind of cause and effect. There is a subsidy being provided by the private market to provide those affordable units, and in turn, a public-private partnership, the government can actually provide a direct subsidy through an abatement to those affordable units. So we lay out the framework for thinking about that. Tax increment financing districts are another kind of tax incentive program that actually uses the increment increase between the current value of the property and its future redeveloped value, being able to capture those funds to actually help fund the development itself or infrastructure related to it. I think the 5 target areas, some more than others, the ones that probably have a greater redevelopment need, say maybe the New Park Ave corridor, or maybe Elmwood or so forth, that these lend themselves well to a tax incrementing financing district and strategy. So I think exploring the adoption of establishing these districts in those target areas would provide another vehicle to assist with multifamily mixed use redevelopment and also affordable housing. Then building on your current success with your affordable housing fund, I think establishing a housing trust fund or an affordable housing trust fund that is a recurring balance carryover account that's authorized by statute, specifically to fund housing and affordable housing would be in the benefit of the community. It can be tied to some of these other policy requirements, such as inclusionary zoning. And once again, we provide the framework for thinking about its adoption. One of the recommendations is that there be a line item to actually put some funds into it on a yearly basis so that the municipality, continues its drive to support this effort. You can then capture funds from other places like permitting fees to provide funding. You could do a surcharge on permits to go directly into this fund. And you can also, and I think it's an opportunity in an active, engaged community in a wealthy community like West Hartford, you can actually raise tax-deductible charitable donations into a fund such as this. So doing some fundraising around it may be another avenue. And then lastly, you already have a housing authority that does a great job providing affordable housing. I think, and this is probably a good entity to build upon, strengthen, continue to support, and ultimately it provides you an opportunity to target those populations in the greatest need of affordable housing, and that's 50% AMI and lower. So I think building on your strengths of the housing authority is important. Reviewing town-owned land and town-owned facilities and identifying, potentially parcels or properties that you have out there that may lend themselves to reuse or redevelopment as being a way to partner with the development community by providing land for affordable housing. And then ultimately administrative capacity. Well, once again, it's not I try not to tell communities how to spend their money, but at the end of the day, if the community is committed to affordable housing, which I think you are, and if you intend to remain committed and move these recommendations forward and so forth, I think creating greater capacity within local government, whether that be better coordinating existing housing functions across departments, and or creating an actual housing department and providing staffing for it would go a long way. At the end of the day, implementation doesn't occur unless there's capacity, and therefore you have to consider capacity. So with that, I believe that is my last slide. I will say thank you, turn it back over to Madam Chair, and I'm available for questions if you have them.
Does anyone have any questions? Councilor Winograd?
Thank you. And thank you for the report. I know it's been a lot of work. And I know we'll have an opportunity to have sort of more detailed discussion at our next meeting. The one area that I do want to hear a good bit more about, and frankly we'll need a little bit of convincing, is on the inclusionary zoning. A lot of your report is sort of focused on the 10% threshold, which, again, is not designed as so much of a state goal as, again, a legal threshold where if you're under it, different rules apply if a qualified developer comes in, but isn't necessarily, certainly the extent market rate affordable isn't counted. You could be at 10% and be an incredibly unaffordable place because it's 10% qualified and 90% unaffordable market rate, and it would be pretty, not the type of community we have. So I do wonder about some of the impact of trying to hit the 10%, potentially being harmful to efforts to make us affordable. And inclusionary zoning, and certainly we've been able to achieve that voluntarily through a lot of our processes for the special development districts. But ultimately, it's telling, to some extent, putting a tax on those who are creating housing in our community of a certain type. And so when there's a recent development of 10 luxury homes are being built that are, didn't require our support. So somebody is going to build 10, pretty expensive homes. No one's asking that developer to put in money in for affordability, but we're putting that requirement through inclusionary zoning on those who are developing multifamily. And so, they do have sort of concerns about, whether that's creating the right incentives. And also, more specifically, the efficacy of it. Because the last thing we want to do is to discourage certain types of building. Instead of on a market analysis, right? If you put an extra cost on it, presumably that's going to reduce some of the supply of it. So I know that's been discussed a lot in other communities. I know in some places it has absolutely been used as a way to discourage apartments by sticking that extra burden on those who would build apartments. Obviously, 8% is a pretty low threshold. I know, again, there's been lots of discussion about where that, in places that have inclusionary zoning. But like I said, every market's different. And I would want to hear more analysis as to how that sort of requirement would impact our supply here, not just right now in a pretty hot market, but how, for the long term, whether there would be potential harms in putting that in. Again, I know it's a big topic, but it's one that, again, I hope we can be prepared to have, sort of broader discussion about that at our next meeting.
Madam Chair, if I may just make a few remarks. One is I'm available to come back for future meetings and further discussions if you wish. In the inclusionary zoning provision, I left it kind of very general, but I want to make a few comments about it. One is it could be adopted to apply to both single family and the multifamily. It's not limited to multifamily. I did a similar provision and adopted an actual regulation change in Tolland. And in Tolland, we basically set a threshold that any development of 10 units or more, whether it be single family, detached, or multifamily, fall under the inclusionary provision. There's also a statutory provision in the land use statutes that allows a fee in lieu of affordable housing to be paid, and that can be tied to the housing trust fund. With an inclusionary provision then for that luxury development of, 10 $500,000+ homes, the option could be not to build an affordable unit, but to pay the fee in lieu of into the community. I think the successes you've had voluntarily show that an inclusionary provision is actually possible, where in other communities we're kind of unsure how possible the inclusionary is because they haven't had that voluntary success. So I hear your concerns, but I think there's opportunities here. The one last thing I just want to say is the state statute is what ties me to the 10%. I wouldn't focus so much on the 10% if it wasn't for the state statute. Well, it's not a metric of actually addressing affordable housing need. It is a metric that is so often referred to. And I think from a public policy and public perspective standpoint, if West Hartford crossed the threshold from being below to high, that would be huge. And I think you guys are unfairly put upon in the media as, supposedly being anti-affordable housing when we show that you've actually had great successes and probably some of the best success in the state in recent years. So crossing that threshold, I think, would just be a huge impact from a public imaging standpoint for you.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah, this is Mayor Cantor. Chair Cantor. I just to build on what we have talked about inclusionary zoning a lot, and gone outside to discuss what is best, because this, as you can see, has been a priority for the council, and we have provided tools that we had never used before, and now we are seeing that needle move in a very substantial way. And I appreciate all your comments, because it's really good to see it actually on paper. And I'd love to have the updates of the new units incorporated in all of our numbers too. Actually, next week we'll be voting on next week. Oh my God. Yeah, we'll be voting. That's right. In less than a week, we'll be voting on a project that also, has a large impact. So I hope we can keep updating those things. But on the inclusion, in the inclusionary zoning, what we've seen is things tied to the inclusionary zoning to get there. With one park, it was a tax fixing agreement, or brownfield grants, or our ARPA, affordable housing fund. So it hasn't been without government help and a government commitment, because we know those financing pieces are very hard. And I think, as you talked about West Hartford being unique, we are unique in that the housing stock has been so strong, which means that land is so expensive, which means that those redevelopment costs are so expensive, and all of those pieces make it challenging, I think, a little more challenging to do a flat out inclusionary zone. I think when we do actions like tax fixing, like whether it's ARPA grant or a loan, that we can, we are demanding that be a requirement. But without that, I think it's very hard. As Ben said, it becomes a tax almost on other people. The other thing I want to say is, West Hartford is largely residential. 90% of our property taxes come from residential property, right? So, 90% are property taxes. 80% of that 90% are residential property taxes, which mean that when we look at home ownership, and we know the low and moderate home values went up substantially, which means that when we did our revaluation, it put more pressure on those homes from a property tax perspective. That part of this is grand list growth that we need to keep our revenue pool coming in to provide the services, the excellent services, the great education for a diverse community, and all of the things that we provide. So it's this it's this balance that we face that is so critical to us. So anyway, I just that's a really important part, and some of the pushback that we get is, all right, yeah, you're providing affordability for this, but you're making it unaffordable here and here. So anyway, obviously, and Ben and I have talked about this a lot, about just increasing housing stock, and supply and demand is so important for our community, because the demand is there. And if the supply is limited, the prices are going to go up, and that's at all levels. So anyway, but so the inclusionary zoning piece is really challenging for us, as it's I think it needs to be tied to other things. But anyway.
Madam Chair, just once again, quick comment. Just please keep in mind that the recommendation in the plan is to explore. It says explore and adopt inclusionary zoning. I'd encourage you to explore it further. I understand the challenges. I understand your concerns. And believe me, as someone who regularly works for developers and helping them get their approvals, I'm sensitive to the concerns over the burden that's created by it. I get it. But I think it is worthy of your exploration further, and whether or not you adopt it, that's the outcome of the process you go through to get there. So.
Any other questions? Okay, if there aren't any other questions, I just want to thank you. I think I have like 8 pages of notes that I've taken. So thank you very much. That was very helpful.
Yeah, as I said, just for one moment, Madam Chair, just want to add on to your comments, and thanking Don for his work on this draft. His presentation this morning was outstanding, very informative, gives us a lot to talk about, which is, as I said at the beginning of the meeting with my opening comments, this is really the first step in a rather longer review process. So we'll add it to our agenda for next month. Our Affordable Housing Advisory Committee will have an opportunity to sink their teeth into this draft plan as well. And we'll talk about it again next month, and then we will finalize this plan and formally adopt it probably in the first part of 24, early January of 24. So Don, thank you again for all of your work. And we look forward to continuing our work together as we move through the finalization of this draft plan. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
So now we want to move on to item 2B, the group childcare home memo.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, I will turn things over to our town planner, Mr. Dumay, who will provide a summary of Public Act 23-142, a statute that will require some slight modifications to our zoning ordinances. And through you, I will turn it over to Todd. Thank you.
Thank you, Town Manager. Madam Chair, so this was a change to the general statutes that I think caught many communities in the state off guard. It wasn't well tracked as necessarily a zoning change, but it is a change to the zoning statutes. What occurred was in the Public Act that the Town Manager referenced, Public Act 23-142, it's called an act concerning certain protections for group and family child care homes. It made a specific change to the statutes regarding zoning, specifically 8.3, which impacted municipalities' abilities to regulate childcare group homes through local zoning ordinances. Specifically, what the act said was that no zoning regulations shall treat a group of childcare home located in a residence and licensed by the Office of Early Childhood in a manner different from single-family or multifamily dwellings, and that any zoning regulations adopted pursuant to the change shall not prohibit the operation in a residential zone of any group childcare home located in a residence or require any special permit or special exception for such operation. What that means in kind of West Hartford zoning language is we need to amend our zoning ordinances. Currently, the way we define, or if we were to match group child care home on the state definition locally, we call it a group daycare home. And that is a facility that provides supplementary child care to not fewer than 7 nor more than 12 unrelated children on a regular basis. And currently, that type of use requires a special use permit from the Planning and Zoning Commission, meaning that it's not as of right, it is treated differently than a single family home or a multifamily dwelling in the comparable zones. It is permitted in all residential and commercial zones, but vis-a-vis a special use permit. To bring our ordinance in compliance with this change, which is now effective a couple of weeks ago, I would suggest that we redefine a group daycare home to make it more in alignment and use the same term, group child care home, just to make the definition and the uses match between local ordinance and state statute. And then really addressing the use provision by noting in our permitted main uses, or our schedule of permitted main uses in our zoning ordinances at the end of the zoning document, is calling out group child care home with a footnote that that use is specifically subject to the issuance of a building or zoning permit. There's other provisions such as a nursery school or child daycare center. Those are unaffected. Those are more commercial in nature and are not operated in residential dwellings. So there's no need to change those provisions. It's really to address this minor amendment to bring us in compliance with the new statute. I can pause there and answer any questions.
Are there any questions?
I just have one, Madam Chair, to Todd. The number you said again was, so 7, I thought what you said over 7, so under 7 doesn't We don't need, you don't need a special use permit for that?
Madam Chair, through you to Madam Mayor, that is correct. So there is another class of child care definition. I think it's called a family child care center. Both the state uses that term and our zoning ordinance use the same term, and that's under 7, so 6 or less. Currently, we don't require any special permitting for that. It's just treated as if it's a normal zoning permit review, the same way we would for a single family or multifamily home. So this basically moves that same threshold. It's a different licensing group by the state, but it moves the 7 to 12 into that same level of treatment, meaning no special permits or review.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Town Manager, I believe you said, what was the process moving forward with this, the timing on it?
So we would add this to a future town council agenda to be referred to TPZ and would be, I believe, subject to a public hearing, correct, Todd?
That's correct. Yes. One of the things we'd also have to do, if I may, Mr. Manager, is it would be a zoning ordinance adoption. We would need to report back to OPM no later than December 1st with our time frame to bring us into compliance, which isn't an issue. We're having the conversation today. It's pretty straightforward for our community. So that's the other piece that we need to do, is just formally report back to OPM about this process.
So we will formulate that letter, send it off to OPM. I'll work with the town planner to identify the exact dates in which this would occur, knowing we have a very busy council agenda schedule coming up over the next couple of months.
Okay, Deb, did you have your hand up?
I did, but I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So from here, we can move on to communications. Are there any communications?
No, Madam Chair, no communications this morning. We do have a community planning update. We have our Director of Community Development, Dwayne Martin, who can provide, given the hour, a brief summary of his report, not to shorten your report, Mr. Martin. Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'll be brief, and feel free to stop me at any time if you have questions, or if you prefer to wait to the end, that's fine too. So I'll start with our flood mitigation improvements. We have completed an update to our engineering division webpage with a lot of useful, I think, information for the public to view and understand where we are and where we're going with a lot of these projects. So the information includes maps for each of the areas that we've studied with proposed improvements, whether they're long-term or first phase projects. We've provided construction cost estimates, and in some cases for the higher priority projects, dates where we anticipate starting construction. So we've been fielding a lot of questions with the flood events about where we are and where we're going. So specifically, we're still focusing on the culverts near Trupper Drive as our first project. We've submitted an application to inland wetlands. Need to do similar permit applications for the state, but we hope to be in construction in next year, 2024, with those culverts. And we are also working on the FEET neighborhood, which is that acronym for the area between Asylum, Farmington Ave, Elizabeth Park, and Trupper Drive. That will be the second major project that we're looking to get into construction. Unfortunately, it's very expensive, but nonetheless, we're going to get that to the finish line. That's not to say we're not working on the other areas at the same time. We are, but those are the two that we're focusing on first to get to construction. We also have been doing a lot of work on Vision Zero, as you're well aware. Just wanted to mention that we had a recent task force meeting, which was very productive. We have a draft action plan that the task force was reviewing and received a homework assignment to vet that further to provide guidance on prioritizing the many actions and strategies within that draft action plan. So you'll be learning more about that very soon, eventually bringing that document to this committee. And Center Master Plan, that project is still going forward. Our consultant for that project provided staff 60% design plans for LaSalle Road and Farmington Avenue reconstructions. So myself and other staff are reviewing and providing comments on that, and we are going to do another level of outreach with direct stakeholders and the public very soon to give updates on this project. And again, that the center master plan will come back to this committee towards the end to produce, demonstrate what product has been produced. Okay, moving on to specific divisions beyond what I've been working on. Building inspection. I just wanted to point out, building division is still doing very well. The performance measures are included in the department report. Real quick though, I want to highlight this division's embattled and has been dealing with a lot of negativity and issues, but we've turned the corner and have been getting a lot of gratitude from our customers, which is nice to hear. But we did recently receive an email, which I just wanted to quickly run through because I think it's very positive. So this was from a contractor to Tim McCloskey, supervisor for that department, the chief building official. So the contractor said, I've been pulling permits in West Hartford for 40 years. During that time, I've seen lots of changes in personnel and policy. We all know you have gone through some tough and aggravating times for all of us. You and your staff have been busting your butts for a while, and the results are great. Your department today is easily the best and smoothest it's been for the 40 years I've been in business. Thank you to you and your staff. Wanted to pass that along for obvious reasons, but also because you guys were instrumental in us being able to improve as a division in the department in that regard. So thank you. Engineering division. We are in the last round or push of our construction season. I believe today or yesterday, we were working on the final paving street, which is Brout Street. So we've accomplished a lot of reconstructions, and our third round of resurfacing that's highlighted in the report. Still some other construction projects ongoing. For example, Trout Trail Phase 7. We plan on continuing to get that done this November and open to the public. That'll get the Trout Trail all the way to Asylum Avenue. And lastly, I'll let Todd DeMay, the town planner, add anything for his division that he would like, but I just wanted to mention that we did hire a full-time assistant zoning enforcement officer. I believe his first day was September 25th. Robert Eisner, he's been an excellent addition to the division. We now have 5 full-time staff in planning and zoning, with plans on bringing another full-time staff person in the near future as an associate planner to get to 6, which is where we need to be. So with Robert Eisner's addition to the division, they've been able to put a big dent in the backlog of zoning permits and matters. Still a bit of effort to get caught up on those, but we're seeing that backlog released, which is great news and good for Todd and his team. So unless Todd has anything further, that concludes my report. He's saying no, so I'll field any questions that you have. Thank you.
Are there any questions?
This is Sherry. I don't have a question, but I have a comment and just saying it really is great to hear. Thank you for sharing the email. And that's, we are on the, we receive a lot of the public concerns, and it's really been an effort from all of us to get to this point, and I'm just really grateful. Thank you.
It's very nice to get the complimentary emails, for sure. Any future agenda items? No? Okay. Seeing no other items, I will move to adjourn this meeting at 9:03 a.m.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.
Good day.
You too.